Hey, what's up, YouTube? Al with Select Start Player One. Just wanted to thank my 10 subscribers from the very first day. It was very exciting to see the numbers come up so quickly. Definitely inspired me to get right on getting another video out to you guys. Also wanted to thank the guys from Retro Liberty for stopping by and posting a comment in our channel. Glad to see you guys. Hope to see some other members of the community stop in. Hopefully they like our video. Wanted to maybe do something a little different for this video instead of a pickup video. I want to touch on a subject that's near and dear to my heart. One of the first real systems that I got into, I didn't have the NES as my first system, as a lot of the guys out there in the community have. The Game Boy was actually my first system. So we're going to do a little video here on the Game Boy, and hopefully you guys like it. If you do, definitely hit the like and subscribes down below. Give us a thumbs up and encourage us. This is going to end up being a two-part because I think there's just too much stuff to cover in one video when it comes to Game Boy. And for me, when I'm talking about the Game Boy, I figure that spans from the original spinach green all the way through to the end of the Game Boy Advance model units. Of course, I don't want to say too much what I mean by advanced model units, but we're gonna cover through the Game Boy Color in the video tonight. So hopefully you like it, and we'll set up and come back in a second. In North America in July of 1989, the Game Boy came onto the scene. It was a follow-up to the Nintendo Entertainment System's Game & Watch series, and was intended to be a portable 8-bit system to put them in the hands of kids, basically. I remember the ad campaigns that were saying, Nintendo Power in your hands. For my birthday that year, one of my mom's boyfriends actually bought me a Game Boy, and I remember my mom wasn't too happy when I spent almost $200 on a single game system. But when you figured it was that game system plus a battery pack plus Super Mario Land, and that it came with Tetris packed in, and of course you had to have a case, it wasn't that bad of a deal. In spite of the system's single speaker, I did enjoy the fact that it had stereo output from the headphones, and in fact the music to the ending of Super Mario Land is probably one of my favorite 8-bit games songs, hands down, and I still to this day think it sounds best when listened to on the original Game Boy headphones. Games were plenty on the original Game Boy, with over 800 titles. Then, in January of 1995, Nintendo decided to release some additional models of the original Game Boy in a series that they called the Play It Loud series. This is the clear model from the Play It Loud series. They also had other colors, including a white one with black details, red, blue. I don't remember all of the colors, mind you, but there were quite a few. Then in 1996, Nintendo released what has now become an industry standard of slimming a console in the form of the Game Boy Pocket. The Game Boy Pocket was smaller, lighter, and required fewer batteries. The link port also changed, which meant you either had to have an adapter or you had to have a cable that had both types of connectors. While the screen had a faster refresh, to me the way it reflected light sometimes actually made it harder to view. About a year later, they offered several different case colors also in this, and this happens to be one of those alternate colors in the blue case. In a Japanese exclusive, the Game Boy Light was released in April 14th of 1998. It featured Timex Indiglo backlighting that caused it to glow a blue-green light. Now we just refer to this as electroluminescent lighting. Sorry for the quiet spot here, guys. Just trying to find my place. Even though the Light Edition was only released in Japan, it did inspire several collectible editions, like the Astro Boy version that I have. This would be the first and last lit Game Boy until the Game Boy Advance SP released in 2003. Next, in November 18th of 1998 in North America was the release of the Game Boy Color. Finally, the one thing that the Sega Game Gear and Atari Lynx had over Nintendo was finally fixed by Nintendo for their handheld system. The word color in the logo actually shows the different colors of the original release colors. My case is actually an aftermarket on this particular Game Boy Color, as I had a habit during the 90s of reshelling all of my game systems with game shells that were smoke gray. I also had a Dreamcast and a PlayStation that I did this with. This is representative of one of the original colors that released when the system came out. The system also had an IR link capability, which meant you no longer needed the link cables to be able to play multiplayer with more than one system, but it did require that you face the person that you're playing against and point the Game Boys directly at each other. Almost 500 games were officially released for the Game Boy Color. Some of my favorite releases on the Game Boy Color was the re-release of the NES Super Mario Bros. Game called Super Mario Bros. Deluxe, and Zelda DX, which was a refresh of Link's Awakening that had 2 extra dungeons, a red dungeon and a blue dungeon, and everything that made that game great in the first place. With its Super Nintendo style of gameplay, it was definitely one of my favorite systems. Later in the life of the Game Boy Color, obviously, we ended up with Ages and Seasons, also 2 great Zelda releases. Some of the other things that came out for the Game Boy Color, obviously, or for the Game Boy system, when we start talking about accessories, the original accessory that I always refer to as the potato battery, because of its shape and its weight. Some people really don't like this accessory, but I actually was glad to have it back then because my mom couldn't afford to constantly buy me batteries, so this made it really nice. Although I used my original potato battery so much that eventually the cord shorted out. This is one that I picked up later in life. Some of the other accessories that came out as the Game Boy matured were things like the Game Boy printer and the Game Boy camera. I have not acquired a Game Boy camera yet, so someday I'll add that to my collection. Then there came the plethora of ways that companies tried to fix the screen. So we had many magnifying lenses with lights built into them that really just made us all feel like we were mad scientists trying to hide under the sheets and play our games. There were also link cables. And more link cables. And yes, I could go back into my box and pull out even more link cables, but you get the point. We did also get a release of the Game Genie for the Game Boy. And then later there were versions of the Game Shark and some other code breaking tools as well. In fact, the Game Boy was so popular it was even targeted for some of those famous Bible games that we hear about all the time on the NES. And movie games. And fighting games. And even this oddball, a travel guide. Yes, if you put this in your Game Boy, you will actually find phone numbers for hotels, airlines, and other travel agencies. And there were pinball games and puzzle games besides Tetris. Oh, did I mention Tetris? And of course, Zelda DX, which I mentioned earlier. I've played this one a little bit, so you can see even the label's starting to wear off on it. Don't worry, I have another copy that looks better. And there's that Mario Deluxe that I mentioned. Battery game, so hopefully my saves are still there. And even this gem that I found in a garage sale for 25 cents just a few months back, I was really kind of surprised because I didn't even know there was a Kid Icarus title on the Game Boy until I found this. So, kind of wraps up my tour of the Game Boy, guys. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope you come back for part 2 when I take a look at all of the different Game Boy Advance items. Oh, wait. I think I'd be a little bit incomplete if I forgot to mention this beast. Yeah, it's an adapter that allowed you to take your Game Boy games, Game Boy or Game Boy Color, and play them on your Super Nintendo. Well, that's it for my brief history of the Game Boy, part 1. Hope to see you back for part 2.